Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We are really excited to have you join us today on the first of what will become a monthly Learning Leaders webinar series. And to introduce myself, my name is Richard. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder and managing director of iLearn, and I'm really excited to be hosting up to almost 200 people that have registered to attend today. And obviously in times like these, we want to learn from the stalwarts and those that are at the front line in business and how they are managing learning within their organizations. So I wanted to give you a bit of perspective on the rationale and the context as to why we decided to put these webinars together. Number one, we believe we have a captured audience and that you're all probably sitting in your home and work offices and need some inspiration from what's going on at the moment. And number two, from a series of previously running some in-person events, one of the greatest feedback that we got was how valuable it was for learning professionals in the markets to be able to come together and learn from each other, and from experience share to be able to not only network but also to take what they've learned and implement within those organizations. So we've prepared today what I believe an illustrious panel of speakers, as well as international speaker and author Mr. John Sinai, who's going to help us with our mindset and our attitude to put us into a spirit of creativity and innovation in order to take up the opportunities that COVID-19 has presented with us today. John is a good friend of mine, and we're honored to have him join us today. So John, if you can turn on your camera and unmute your microphone, we are ready for you.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Loud and clear? Great. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Richard. I'll dive straight in. I've only got 10 minutes, so I just want to make the most of it. I've been writing 3 new books, Future Now, Future How, and Future Next, trying to ascertain the mental state we need to have through this process, the emotional calmness that needs to come with this space, as well as understanding what it is and how we need to behave as we move into the future. So I'll dive straight into the beginning of the keynote, and the talk really is about Future Now. And it's about this concept that we are now in the future. The future's arrived actually 10 years too early. We all thought that what was going to be happening now would be coming in 2030, but all of a sudden here we are. And we are doing everything online. Digital education is now the norm. So welcome to the future, where both our dreams and our nightmares become a reality. Welcome to the future where it's not so much survival of the fittest, it is now survival of the quickest. And welcome to the world where efficiency is being superseded by robustness. And welcome to the world where fundamental paradigm adaptation becomes your superpower. Welcome to a world where the supply and demand business model. Richard? Okay. I'm having echo on my mic now. What did you do? Welcome to the world where the old adage of supply and demand being the business model that we all followed is being now disrupted by 6 new business models that I'm starting to track. This coronavirus has shaken the foundation of our social and economic coexistence indefinitely. We are experiencing an uncontrollable collapse of everyday life and the world we once knew. What happens now, how we act now, will change the way we do business, the way we structure our societies, run our governments, the way we work, the way we collaborate, the way we consume, the way we spend, what we spend on, the way we travel, where do we travel to and how often, and the way we educate ourselves are all changing exactly at the same time. This is a very uncomfortable place for most of us. Most of us feel exhausted because our brain cannot compute all the changes that are happening around us. And so what we do as humanity is we crave to go back to normality. And let's remember that the normal we came from wasn't a great place, because where we came from, we were exhausted most of the time. The ecosystems and the planet were exhausted. We were always chasing this elusive need of more. And guess what? We could never arrive. And so as human beings, we crave familiarity. It becomes a comfort zone that we seek. And actually, we should be doing exactly the opposite now. We are in an opportunity, a pause, a time to reflect of what we want to do moving forward. How do we reimagine the world ahead of us? And this need for familiarity is so deep in our psychology that we often find ourselves repeating the relationships of our mothers and fathers, because what happens in our relationships as adults is when we don't seek love, we often seek familiarity. And so this need for familiarity is something that we need to break. We need to stop and think about the reimagining of the future. And the best analogy I can give you is, imagine you're inside a home, and your home, one side of it is burning, and the other side of it, you have renovations happening. And so what you're doing is you're standing right in the middle of this, trying to save what's burning while you're trying to build the new. And so we can't do both. And so for me, the trick is to let the old burn, let it burn. Try not to want to go back to it. Try and reimagine what the renovation of your new home will look like. And so an example that I can give you is just recently one of the top conference centers in South Africa got hold of me and said, look, we want you to come in and do a media drive with us to try and remind all our customers that meeting in person is key. And it's important that we continue having conferences and events. And my response to him was, I absolutely will not do that, because I think it is a totally wrong way to go about doing it. He says, what do you mean? Our business is dying. I said, yes, your brick and mortar business is on fire. But what about your new digital business? What about digital conferencing? What about giving your clients a hybrid solution to having conferences both offline and online? And it was like a light bulb moment came up for him. And the trick now is not to look for answers, but to actually start asking new questions. And so I get this all the time from clients, existing clients, new clients, people on social media. Please tell us what it's going to look like ahead of us. Please give us some certainty. But the truth is, we have now entered an era that I'm calling certainty disillusion. There is no certainty. All our futures have been canceled. Nobody can tell us what's going to happen. We have no idea. Governments, bankruptcies, economic states, all of these things are up to be shifted, changed, and reimagined. And so when we can't predict the future, the only thing we can do is manage our behavior. And in our individual capacity, in an organizational capacity, we all have cultures, behaviors, thought processes, habits, rituals, and behaviors that determine what we do next. And these behaviors are determined by the stories and memories that we hold. And these stories and memories justify things that we do. And we have to rethink these memories. We have to rethink these stories, because just like slavery is no more a good story when it was once a good story, was never a good story, but it was accepted in social norms. Child labor was also an accepted norm. Having women not vote was an accepted norm. Apartheid was an accepted norm. All of these are disgusting. All of them are ridiculous. And if we think about our socio-economic system that we've been living for the last 150 years, that makes us robots, not humans. None of us spent enough time with our families. None of us spent enough time doing the things we loved, because all we're doing is running from pillar to post, trying to be successful, and is only measured in material terms. We have become a sophisticated human being. We have become a sophisticated culture. We have to step up and start designing the world that we want. And my second book, called Future How, is looking about how do we ask new questions about this new future we want, rather than being stuck in why is it like this? Why pushes us to the past. How asks us, how do we redesign? What are the new skill sets that we need to have? What is the new way that our customers want to be serviced? So in our individual capacity, the question is how do I dive deeper into who I am so I can come out of this, the other side of post-COVID-19, becoming more authentic, more unique, because the world we're moving into is looking for authenticity, trustworthiness, and uniqueness, not surplus. And the world is full of surplus. And the reason the world is full of surplus is that we have all been given the opportunity to study similar courses at university, doing similar jobs in similar companies, creating similar products. And the Industrial Revolution forced us to play these roles that fitted into production and efficiency and profitability. But we're moving into a world that's not linear. It's multi-adaptive, it's multifaceted. And now we can move away from hierarchical organizations to networks organizations and businesses. And so what we have to do in our individual capacity is, look, don't throw away all your qualifications. They're wonderful. But how can you personalize them? How can you bring your curiosity into them? How can you bring what makes you most excited into them so you can bring more authenticity into the world post-COVID-19? And as an organization, no matter how small or big your business is, what you need to be focusing on is how do you start answering your questions, your customers' future need states. And your customers' future need states will always be around three things. They all want more personalization, they all want more convenience, and they all want more trust. And this business model is called curate, match, and facilitate, meaning that you need to curate what your customers want using data and machine learning. You need to match it to them based on their personal preferences, and you need to facilitate it to them for as cheaply as possible. And you know who does that really well is Spotify. Spotify is so ahead of the game because all of us are now being fed music based on our personal taste on a continuous basis for $5 a month. I mean, it's incredible to think that that business can do that with that much machine learning and that much artificial intelligence and data points, and giving us something that has fundamentally changed my relationship to music. And you can see the vast difference between Spotify and Netflix. Netflix gives us choice, not suggestion. And so we initially were craving choice, but now we go onto Netflix, it takes us 20 minutes to try and figure out what we want to watch. And by the time we figured out what we want to watch, we're so bored we don't even want to watch it, and we keep moving. So what Netflix is now working on is trying to figure out how do they suggest better rather than giving us so much choice. So all of us, no matter what business you're in, no matter what career you have, one, you need to make it more curious, more excited, more based on your individual power, connected with your qualifications. And then as a business, start redesigning and asking new questions about what the future may look like. And I want to end off with this beautiful passage that I found in the Financial Times from a lady called Arundhati Roy. And she says this. She says, "Has historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And we can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcass of our prejudice and hatred, our greed, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." I urge us to all stop craving to try and save the fire inside our homes and start focusing on renovating a world that's focused on bringing something into reality that our children are going to be proud of. Not an earth that was focused on profit only while we destroyed ecosystems and forests and everything else based on an old paradigm of measuring success only materially. That's me, Richard. Do I still have to entertain, Rich? Hello? Anybody out there? And I've been doing a lot of webinars recently, and webinars are really weird for speakers because what you're doing is you're speaking to yourself. And usually my webinars are 30 or 40 minutes, and it's like speaking to yourself in the mirror for 30 or 40 minutes. And you kind of think, why is my nose so skew? And like, oh, my hair needs a haircut. And so it's a weird thing. Richard, are you coming back, or am I going to continue this conference by myself? Anyway, I'm out. Cheers, guys. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Bye.
Sorry, everybody. We seem to be having technical issues. I don't know if the panelists can come back on camera and if they can hear me. There we go. All right, so I am going to jump in right now. I see Richard has lost connection. My name is Megan. I'm the Learning Solutions Manager for iLearn here in Cape Town. I'd welcome everybody on behalf of Richard. And also, if I can ask the panelists to just quickly do an introductory on themselves, where they're from, and in brief, you know, what the learning and development looks like in their particular sectors. Can we start with you, please, Clareland?
Love the world. I think I've only been unmuted now. I think I've been speaking to myself, like John said. No problem. So hi, I'm Cleland. I head up learning and development for Metropolitan Life. Prior to that, I've worked both in human resources and in learning and development in a range of different companies, both globally and locally. But yeah, my true passion lies in learning and development. And I think I'm a type of person that always tries to look for the silver lining in every cloud. And although we're struggling a lot with what COVID is doing and how it's pulled the rug out from under us, I think there's also been a lot of positivity in terms of how our L&D strategy has moved from classroom-based to digital literally within 2 weeks. Something that I was punting and fighting for 2-3 years, and we couldn't get right. And suddenly, because we didn't have an option, we've managed to get right. So I hope today I can share some of the positive stories and some of the innovative ways that we've embraced having to change our learning to this new normal.
Okay, thank you very much. And Colin, from your side?
Hi, my name's Colin. I'm the L&D manager at Boardwalk Casino and Hotel down in Port Elizabeth. I've been with the Sun International Group for about 15 years now. I have a background in food and beverage and hospitality. I grew up in the training world, teaching bartenders how to throw bottles around and flare and make cocktails and teach waiters. And yeah, now I've worked at 3 of our biggest units at Sun International, and I've traveled to all of them. We have just under 15. And yeah, responsible for the day-to-day strategic implementation of training plans in my units and others.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Colin. Kurt, what's happening in the world of Maersk?
Great, thanks for that. So I'm Kurt de Beek. I'm HR business partner and also look after learning for Africa. Maersk is the world's largest container shipping company, so pretty much move a fifth of the world's goods, imports and exports, and so it's been an interesting time. Obviously, we've been part of delivering essential services and products and food throughout this time. So yeah, we've also had to pivot quite a bit of our learning programs over the course of the last number of weeks. So yeah, I look forward to chatting today.
Fantastic, thank you. And Samnet, last but not least, if you can just give us insight on your world at SPA.
Awesome. So I'm Samnet Meyer, and I'm the Human Resource Development Manager at SPA Central Office. So I will predominantly talk about my role at Central Office, but I can give some insight into the world of training with our stores and our DCs. So I also, like Colin said, grew up with training by default. It wasn't the intention. I was supposed to go to Germany, but had a bit of a mishap and ended up in training, and 26 years later, still in training. I've developed more into an OD space. So where Cleland said there's a bit of a silver lining, I'm very much an I told you so person. So I've been advocating a shift from L&D to OD for the last 2 years. And with our high volumes of travel in my office, I've been advocating different ways of doing things. So this has just accelerated everything I've been preaching for the last 2 to 3 years. So if I look a bit smug, it's probably because I am, because this is just playing so much into the space that we are in at SPA Central Office. So I'm quite enjoying the space. I might be the only L&D person that's really enjoying it, but yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, thank you very much. All right, so to kick off for just setting the tone, sorry?
It's Richard, I managed to get back. Sorry for technical issues. Thank you for stepping in, and thank you everyone for introducing themselves. All right, cool. So I wanted to, before we get into some of the questions, when we put out the registration link for people to attend, there were a lot of questions that they asked, and we got the most unbelievable data and information from the people that registered, and we've picked a couple of the questions to pose to you guys. But before we start, I wanted to give you some perspective of the attendees that did register, kind of who are they and what were some of their answers. So the first is we asked about employment, sort of company size. And we'd say that we had 50% of the attendees are mid to large organizations, and 50% were smaller businesses. So I think just to give you some perspective on what type of organizations we're dealing with. Then we asked, how do you expect the COVID-19 outbreak to impact employment at your organization? And interestingly, literally down the middle, 50% said they're going to stay the same or they're going to increase, and 50% we're going to reduce employment across various percentages, from 30% to 20 to 10, etc. So again, a sort of even split between the two. The next question we asked was, how will COVID-19 impact your learning budget? And unfortunately, which I think is obvious, 60% of the respondents said they're going to decrease their learning budget. A very small percentage said they were going to increase, and sort of midway was that it would remain unchanged, which obviously is good news. Then we asked, in terms of a digital learning solution, the obvious benefits of being able to provide learning and maintaining social distancing and people working from home. And we asked, are you considering a solution to combat these factors? And an overwhelming 2/3 said that they were considering a digital learning solution now. So that was really interesting, and I think should set the tone. I mean, we did also ask, what are people doing or what measures are they putting in place as a response to COVID-19, and what are some of the immediate low-hanging fruits that people have managed to achieve. So I'll just rattle off a couple of those. I think a big factor was getting everybody to be able to work from home, which I think for a lot of organizations is really not that simple. The technicalities around that, the data and connectivity, but I think that was a big focus, and that together with providing laptops and what have you. Another big focus was PPE, providing protective gear for employees. And then more interestingly, a lot of respondents said that they have upped the ante on the employee assistance programs. And in one case, had someone said that they're now doing weekly yoga classes for their employees, obviously doing it over video conferencing, which I thought was really nice. And then perhaps some of us take this for granted, but not everybody had the technology or the capability to run virtual meetings. So that was a huge focus, and obviously getting something like Microsoft Teams or Zoom and all the others that we're used to. And then I think also interestingly, there was an overwhelming response that people mentioned was increasing communication. And I can understand how important that is for to keep employees connected and using things like WhatsApp groups. Some even mentioned sort of pulse surveys across the organization, perhaps to do like a health check to see how people are doing, take into account perhaps the mental and psychological impact of Groundhog Day, being at home all day. And then the obvious learning interventions have been virtual training platforms, online learning, e-learning, and then also self-paced learning. So I thought that might help set the tone, just to give you some perspective that this is what people are coming with. And because we've muted them or we can't talk to them, so this is their voice. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, which Cleland, if I can invite you to answer it. The question was, and we got this quite a lot, was what new and innovative approaches to learning have you put in place since the start of the pandemic?
Thanks, Richard. I'm just going to give a little bit of context and almost address it as a little bit of a case study. So we had a group of approximately 200 new financial advisors that were appointed and due to start on the 1st of April. And these advisors normally go through about a week and a half instructor-led face-to-face training. So when we were informed we were going into lockdown, we obviously needed to honor the contracts and the employment of these individuals, but we needed very quickly to come up with a way to go, well, how are we going to train these people? And I mean, it was literally within a week and a half. So sort of from the 20-something of March, we started working on converting all of our training from classroom-based into virtual training. Gearing up our facilitators who had never facilitated virtual before. I mean, people had never even been on a Zoom or anything like that before. So upskilling them, seeing how we were going to actually facilitate, putting them through a miniature train the trainer, etc. To add even more complexity to it, the 200 advisors that started on the 1st of April, if you take into account it's sort of metropolitan, both our clients as well as our employee is sort of more emerging markets. So these are people that are not necessarily technical savvy. In fact, none of them had a laptop or a PC. All that they had was a phone. Some of them didn't even have a smartphone. The majority, about 98%, had a smartphone. So not only did we need to convert to digital, but we needed to do it in such a way that it was mobile enabled and with using as little data as possible. So what we basically did is we created a virtual blend, still with a very high facilitator presence, but we essentially divided the guys up. So each facilitator had their group of learners, and they followed a process where they would do a little bit of Zoom. So in the mornings, they would get a Zoom, set the scene, what was the day going to entail. We would then switch onto WhatsApp, where we would have PDF documents that we would send through to them on WhatsApp. They would be able to read this again. You can't print it out, so they had to read it on their cell phones. It was some self-study things. We had pre-recorded voice notes that the facilitators would then send through at certain times. So assuming that you would take an hour to read something, straight after that you would get a voice note explaining something further. You then get back on a Zoom, re-engage with your facilitator. They would clarify different things. The end of every day, you would do an assessment where these guys being on cell phones couldn't get through to that on our normal learner management system. So we had to convert assessments into Google Forms. And I think you kind of get a picture of what it was like. It was incredibly interesting. I mean, we were absolutely in the deep end, no learner, no facilitator, none of us knew what we were actually doing. And it was incredibly successful. At the end of the training, we only had one person that dropped off and didn't complete the training. And of the people that completed the training, we had 97.5% passed all of their financial assessments and were mandated in our solutions. So it was so successful, in fact, that we have started to look at embracing this virtual blended training strategy as a new norm going forward. In other words, we will not go back to classroom even if lockdown is released, but we've had such success that this will become our new way of facilitating.
Wow, that is really impressive. Well done. And I think, you know, I think the tough part in all of this is that you're having to survive and innovate at the same time, and you got like a 1 week deadline. So I think, yeah, really hats off. Colin, I'd like to bring you in here. I mean, imagine your operations are completely closed and you got all your staff at home. Have you been able to be innovative in any way?
Yeah, you're quite right there. We're in total shutdown. Very few staff members are actually on site, and it's really just the essentials. And a lot of our staff do not have the same kind of access that Cleland does. So we've relied on our very strong culture of self-study. We have a very prolific study assistance program. We've continued with that, allowed our staff to study on their own and to follow their study programs that way. Yeah, that's as much as we've been able to do at this point. We're communicating very clearly and very often on our intranet, and that's it for now.
Okay, you've got to do what you got to do. Well done. All right, so the next question is, which as you can imagine, learning budgets are decreasing. There are companies that are laying off staff. So the question was, how do you implement learning and development with little or no budget? And Kurt, if I can bring you in there, you know, obviously we know ordinarily you start the financial year, you get a learning budget to do a combination of compliance and business skills and product training. Yeah, any words of wisdom with delivering learning at very low cost?
So Richard, when I listen to your question, my initial reaction is move to another company that's going to invest in learning, because that organization that's not investing in learning is not going to be around for a long time. That being said, I know that often when times get tough, you know, now previously I worked in the oil industry, and we saw oil prices go from, you know, at that time $30 per barrel was hell, and you know, lots of things get changed and chopped and whatever. But I think I think with the sharing economy that we're in now, we can be a lot more creative. So I think we've got a lot more access. So if that was what my HR director came back to me with, I would say we use LinkedIn Learning, and we maybe subsidize 50% of it or something like that. I think it's something like $560 per month, and you get a lot of learning content. You know, use things like your TEDx talks. And then, you know, I think, you know, focus more on kind of your relationship type of learning approaches. So maybe mentoring and coaching, and utilize internal resources that are willing to give and to empower others.
That reminds me of a quote when someone says, you know, what if we provide training to someone and they leave and we've invested in them? And the response is, or what if we don't train them and they stay? So I think that's really a great analogy. So next, let's bring you in here. Tell us, I mean, are you increasing or decreasing your budgets? How's this going to impact for you? And got any bright spark ideas?
Well, at the moment, SPA's quite a sociable company. I'm saving quite a lot of money on not feeding people during training sessions because I think that's half the time they attend. It's for the nice lunches. So there I've seen a saving. But we were quite lucky that the same as Colin, we've got quite a strong self-directed learning with our bursary scheme. I've been doing talent modules for the last 4 years with DDI, and we managed to convert them into a virtual classroom very quickly. So we are up and running in the next 2 weeks, taking exactly what we've been doing. And it's actually decreased my budget because I've got high volumes of travel, so I could never get everyone in the same room at the same time. And with a virtual classroom, it's cut out that problem. So it's actually, I've seen a reduction in my training budget, and even I'm busy working with iLearn to convert some of my culture modules into like gamification and all of that, and it's actually working out cheaper than the actual face-to-face facilitation. So I'm actually saving.
That's fantastic, brilliant. So tell us a bit about the virtual classrooms that you've created. There's a feeling that you can't necessarily take let's say a 2 or 3 day instructor-led course and do that over Zoom. There's, people I think get fatigued sitting in front of a screen. Have you thought of that? And what sort of measures are you putting in place?
So our modules, it used to be 2 days. We've broken it down to physical facilitation to 1 day. The methodology is broken. The modules now, because it's quite intense over Zoom training with a virtual classroom, we do it in 3.5, 4 hours. So we don't do longer than that because people can't concentrate. But it's also quite interactive. The way the methodology is done, you've got breakaway rooms, they can participate, but it's 3.5 to 4 hours of quite intense training. And that is, we're not doing more than that. That answers your question, Richard?
Yeah, perfect, spot on. Yeah,
and then we've also run, because at SPA we've got a culture of kind of relationships and having fun. We've been I've also developed a wellness program for the ladies, which instead of face-to-face, you get a video, you get a piece of work you do, you get WhatsApp voice note feedback, and 2 Pilates classes. So we've taken away the actual sitting in the classroom, so you can view the video whenever you want. You can do your classroom-based work whenever you want, as long as it's in by the Friday. You get voice note feedback, and you can do the Pilates class after. Whoever's working remotely, we've put it at a time where it suits everyone. So that's what we've been trying to do.
That's amazing. And obviously, I would imagine, and firstly, thank you for feeding South Africa, because SPA has remained open. But anything in store, or is it sort of all hands on deck?
At the moment, it's like Christmas trade. Don't go close to a retailer with any training demands. So training, we do have, for the last about 3 to 4 years, we've actually had a big drive with our e-learning. I'm just looking at some stats here. We've got 670 of our staff participating in e-learning, doing over about, I'm going to pull a Zoom out here, 1,122,000 different modules. And it has been great, but yeah, we also have issues because it has to be, there's no support structure at the moment to be driving those e-learning modules. And there's no, we've got regional guys that assist with the transfer of learning. So the e-learning, it's still there in store, but yeah, you can't approach the stores now. It's the same as Christmas trade. They'll take you out at the knees. So training is not, it's not top of their priority list. And that's even with my staff. I'm not doing training, I'm supporting. I'm looking after the well-being of my staff and doing very little technical training.
Okay, fantastic. Out of interest, has anyone doing anything around well-being, mental awareness, and psychological impacts? Kurt, let's bring in here. I don't think people should underestimate what's going on in people's lives because of that.
Yeah, so mental illness has actually been a big focus for Maersk over the last few years, and we, during mental wellness month, we actually had a number of sessions actually where we had our external partners share, specialist psychologists coming in and sharing webinars globally around key topics around mental health. And so when COVID hit, we recognized that we need to really ramp up our support there. So we put it into a number of forums. We put it more in our e-learning tool. We added a number of, I think we added in excess of 50 additional courses, just covering around mental health, around mindfulness, around yoga, so we went out dealing with anxiety, all that sort of stuff. We leaned a lot on our partners. We used CompSci, so they did a series of webinars around different mental health issues and coping at home with families and so on. And then we also did recently, we felt what was missing was more of the social connection, right? So you can do a webinar, you can do e-learning, but people really want to have a discussion. So we've started a series called Let's Talk, where we basically host a 1-hour session with a group of employees just talking around a topic. If you picture you sitting on your living room on a Sunday afternoon with family and friends, let's just talk. Let's talk. How are you parenting during this time? How are you feeling, etc. And trying to have those authentic conversations, and the feedback on that, we've actually had to add a number of additional sessions because employees felt, it was really helpful. We alone at home, yes, but we're not alone. Everybody's kind of going through their own challenges here. And then people were sharing different apps they were using, how, like Headspace, and also a part of the silver lining around this experience. I think that is what people appreciated.
That's phenomenal. I can tell you in our experience, we've got a performance coach that meets with every staff member every month, and which we as a smaller organization did in lieu of a full-time HR person. And it's been an absolute game changer for us in helping people align their personal purpose with that of the organization. And in times like this, when times might get tough, that's something that was an absolute priority for us and that we increased. Sanette, you want to say that?
So yeah, also what we've done is obviously, we at SPA, we treat our consultants as family. And, we're very mindful that certain of our providers also need to put bread on the table. So I've actually utilized some of my facilitators who are coaches, and I've been giving staff coaching because, especially like Kurt mentioned, homeschooling your kids, cleaning the house, cutting the grass, and working from home is quite daunting. So we've been using our facilitators as coaches. The coaching has been doing great. So people haven't had a need for actual technical training. The coaching has gone well. We're very big into the Enneagram. So our coaching circles, we're starting our coaching circles next week again, but the conversations, the people need those conversations. So I'm actually going to steal Kurt's idea of the Let's Talk and start that next week. But yeah, so that's how we've also kind of assisted our smallish training providers, is by utilizing them as coaches and the behavior coaching.
Fantastic. All right, cool. I'm going to jump to the next question. Sorry, Karen, did you want to say something?
No problem. I just wanted to say, especially for smaller companies that maybe don't have like an employee wellness program, and you might be thinking, okay, well, I don't have counselors and coaches, and how do I deal with it? And I think the conversations is definitely important. You can see people are craving that social connection, but even just taking the small stresses away. So we sent out a flyer to all of our staff to go, it's okay if you're on a Zoom and the dog barks, or the child runs past, or your husband's in the background, or whatever it is, it's okay. Don't stress about those kind of things. And you could already even just feel just something that small took a lot of the anxiety off people. So, again, to the smaller companies, you don't need a massive budget or engage with providers to do this. It's those small, it's almost thinking of like acts of kindness in terms of helping people to de-stress.
That's so spot on. That's amazing. Well done. All right, so let's move to the next one, which is, what do you anticipate the key trends to be in digital learning? And how will the data issue impact learners in lower income groups? Colin, is Sun International doing anything around e-learning? I can imagine a lot of your staff who are not necessarily connected all the time. Anything to share on that?
Yeah, we're definitely moving into the e-learning space. We have a lot of legislative programs that are easy to put into the digital space. We've started doing that already and partnered with e-learning providers. So that is definitely going to ramp up the take up on that. We're going to be forced to use that in a big way, and I'm excited and looking forward to that kind of space. The data issue is an issue. Luckily, in our environment, we provide free Wi-Fi to our staff. So as long as you're on the premises and you're at work, you'd be able to download videos and PDFs, etc. I think a great way to encourage that and to encourage the more agile learning and flexible learning is to add a gamified process into it. And as people, for instance, finish a module, they'll be rewarded with more data, which you can use for the next thing. That would be an excellent way to encourage further learning in that space.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think a lot of people complain about data in this country and the comparison with other countries. There's been a huge drive to zero-rate access to educational institutions. We in fact ourselves have applied to that process, which is a maze to try and get right. But yeah, there are some companies doing some innovative things around data. Is there anybody that has looked at maybe reverse billing or anything like that?
So
or mobile learning, anything around mobile learning?
Yeah, so we explored reverse billing. Reverse billing is, unfortunately, you pay a premium for the reverse billing, so your data costs actually increase. But yeah, in our situation, we've also at our points of presence, so like our branches, we have Wi-Fi, which people can connect to, but obviously during lockdown, people haven't been able to go to those sites. So we've had to actually provision data, and it is a costly exercise. And unfortunately, even when you try and go as light as possible on your virtual learning, video, Zooms, webinars, those types of things are big eaters of data. But that being said, and I think very much to Sanet's earlier point, is when we look overall at the budgets, even though we are spending this considerable amount on data, it pales in comparison to what we were spending on travel and accommodation and food and venue hire, etc., which essentially has no ROI on your learning, whereas you almost feel, with spending on the data, it's got a better ROI for the business. So it is expensive. We also in a situation where we've got a lot of quite rural points of presence, where all the money in the world can't buy you connectivity. So those are a couple of things that we are still struggling with. How do we actually overcome that?
Okay, excellent.
I think, Richard, just to... Sorry, maybe just, I think, obviously we're dependent on providers here as well. I think both Vodacom and MTN have recently slashed their data prices. I think MTN 30% after a lot of pressure. So I was actually quite keen to see what, I know some of the quarterly results for the telecoms comes out next week. Be keen to see, just given, we're all spending a lot more time. I think WhatsApp usage has gone through the roof. So, I'm sure there's a lot more revenue must be coming in there for those providers, and hopefully that also helps escalate, the pressure to kind of lower data prices, just given the volumes.
Yeah, then interestingly, there's the new player on the block, which is Reimagining, which offers a 4G unlimited data connection for 250 Rand a month on a month-to-month contract. That for me is completely going to disintermediate the market providing and actually take away the data issue. We just hope that obviously their network can keep up with an enormous surge in demand, and there's been talk that it hasn't been great. So yeah. All right, so and then what new skills do you foresee will be needed? Anything out of the ordinary? Perhaps, I don't know if you're thinking that far. but when operations fully resume, is there something that you think that is as a result of this pandemic you're going to really need to focus on? Colin, any ideas?
Well, we're a very face-to-face, customer-facing company, as you know. So the vast majority of our staff are going to be face-to-face, and usual kind of management practices would take place. But I think we've seen that the possibility for remote work is huge, and I think we, as a company, we're really going to look at that as a new way of working. With that comes the new skills. How do you manage people who work remotely? You've got to look very carefully at your performance management processes and do some really careful thought on outcomes-based KPIs that add value and bring value. We're not wanting to measure, you know, how many times you're online or how long you're online. We want to measure what real output and value you're adding, and that's going to be a skill to learn, along with the skill of accountability. Working at home comes with your own accountability. You can't manage yourself. You've got to learn how to be accountable to yourself and to a team and to your manager. Those are definitely skills I think that service providers can start writing down in their books of training programs to start providing.
Yeah, I wonder if there may be more of a focus on things like resilience and grit, and a focus on work ethic and productivity and that type of thing, where there really just needs to be, you know, full self-responsibility of the individual, regardless of where they're working from. Because I suspect that there's going to be, yeah, I feel sorry for the commercial landlords, but I think there's going to be a huge wave and an interest to work from home. Sunette, are you aligned for that in any way in the future, do you think?
You know, with moving from an L&D to a more OD perspective, we've been working on things like Colin mentioned, resilience, self-directed teams. So I've spent quite a lot of time in the last 2 years working with high-functioning teams, putting behaviors in. So I drive culture and I drive our strategy. So a lot of those what the IT guys used to refer to as soft skills have actually proven to become quite beneficial during this time. So I've been building resilience, building self-directed teams behind the scenes, and it's just kind of hard, you know, it's really kind of proven quite effective. So that's where my little bit of smugness comes in. So we've been shifting to the OD focus. So and it's just like to harness that even further. So yes. But so I've seen a decrease in technical training and a lot more into the emotional intelligence, resilience, high performance teams training over the last 2 years.
You absolutely are ahead of the curve. You were well prepared for this pandemic. Well done.
Yeah, but our still not as much. But
yes.
I think something that we also maybe need to think about is as lockdown eases, and people actually come to terms with this new normal, there's already talk of people actually going through like a bit of a PSTD process. And actually, how do we deal not just from a wellness perspective of where we are now, dealing with a pandemic, but actually gearing people to be ready to actually deal with the new normal and kind of this post-traumatic stress phase that they are predicting will happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
that's hectic.
Oh, I think we've got time.
If I can just.
Thank you, Kurt. Please.
Sorry, just wanted to chip in on the capabilities piece, you know, and so last year I did quite a bit of training around change agility because we were going through quite a transformation in the organization, and we had this assessment which measures your psychological appetite or where you are, how resistant you are to change, and what came up was tolerance for ambiguity was actually where most of our staff were struggling, right? Which is and ambiguity being different from uncertainty. Ambiguity, there's a number of options that you can go into and it's unclear, and I think that concept is going to be a lot more critical moving forward if I look at our leaders and how they're required to lead in these times where things are not very clear. So that tolerance for ambiguity, and then we also focus quite heavily on how do we have our leaders engage our staff remotely during this time. And you got to be creative, you got to be more persistent, and I think more disciplined when people are sitting at home and trying to keep them at high levels of engagement.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask the rest of the panel how they've looked at their training methodologies for your training specialists or your facilitators. Because training online, everybody thinks it's different, and it is to a large extent. Are they just applying the same kind of methodologies, the same kind of training ways, or are you trying to do something very different?
I think we need to adapt, Colin. I think the more I chat with people from the different institutions, it's around, turning it, the whole thing is turned upside down. And if you can just try and replicate what was in a classroom online, it's not going to work. So I think we know facilitation is an art in and of itself in a classroom, and even on a webinar like this, it's a different skill set. So I think what we try and do is follow a more Socratic approach, so that it's not just one way. It's asking questions similar to like we're doing now that drives engagement. And and then looking at I think it was Cleland that mentioned earlier on, you have pre-work, post, and leveraging just that blended type of approach.
So Colin, I've tried sending free e-learning out, and I had 7 out of 437 take up the challenge. So we also have to be very mindful of our culture. So Cleland talked about PSTDID. Our staff are huggers. I don't know how we're going to prevent them from hugging when they come back to work, but also Spark people want to talk and they want to interact. So e-learning for my staff is not working 100%. We had to go virtual classroom. We did the virtual facilitator training with DDI on Monday, and my biggest challenge was not talking with my hands. It felt like I had to kind of cable tie them to the chair. So there is going to be a lot of that. You can't turn around, you can't write on the whiteboard. So it is a different way of doing. But the Zoom is quite nice because they can still interact, they can write comments, they can raise their hand. So that is the platform we've chosen because of our staff wanting to interact. So I also don't want to bring in training methodologies that goes against our culture, because that culture of family and relationship is not something I want to change because of a pandemic. So we're very mindful of that.
And I think that's where purpose and culture come through so strongly in an organization. And I'm almost sure in times like these, this is when your purpose and your culture statements really come to the fore. And will really be a good test for organizations, for those that are thriving, I would like to think, have got good, solid culture and DNA within the organization to lean on, comparatively to those that don't. I have a list of another 10 questions, but we've unfortunately run out of time. And I do like to keep to time, and which is a good reason for us to continue to schedule more and more of these, because we're going to have more interest. So yeah, I think we're going to end off. Thank you so much for your participation and for joining us today. And yeah, what a great session, and wishing you guys all the best in your roles and in your businesses, and hopefully we'll thrive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy.
Thanks. Bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.